Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I am AJ Kuftic, Field CTO with Expedient, and I'm joined by Harsha Kotikela, who is Director of Solutions and Marketing at Nutanix. Harsha, how are you today?
Hi, AJ. Pleasure to be here. Very nice to be here. So I'm doing great in here from hello from San Jose, California.
Yeah, so we are doing a cross country. This is really the real Team USA. The Olympics are going on and everything, but this is the real Team USA happening right now. Um, so I wanted to kind of start really down at the basics with Nutanix. Can you kind of provide a brief history of how Nutanix, got started and how it's really grown into what it is today?
Yeah, definitely. So Nutanix was founded in 2009, right? So since then, so what we first innovated was we were the pioneers in something we call the hyper-converged infrastructure. Essentially, it's bringing like storage, compute, and network layer together, right? So at that time, there were some challenges with scale-out architecture, right? And also some challenges with SAN-based architecture, right? Like, I was a developer before, so to provision things in a SAN-based architecture, it takes a little bit more time consuming. And for planning also, it's a little bit time consuming, right? So at that time, Nutanix innovated this HCI architecture. So since then, at this point now, we have more than 25,000 customers, many of them global 2K customers. And since then, from a product innovation perspective, we've innovated, since the initial HCR architecture. From there, we've innovated something called we have AHV, our inbuilt hypervisor, right? That's there. And then on top of it, we've also built the complete management layer, right? Providing you intelligent operations, cost management, any of those things for your day-to operations, right? And then going forward, also, as we see, look to the future, there's also containers, right? Like moving from virtual machines to containers. So we also have an orchestration layer to help you manage large-scale container environments, right? So essentially, that's kind of a brief history. I know we'll get into more
Yeah.
details here as in our conversation, but that's the overall history from
Yeah.
Nutanix.
And I think for us, and at least for me, I remember seeing them back in 2011. And it was one of those things where it's like, oh, wait, you could do that. Oh, wait, that actually makes a ton of sense. I
Yeah,
want to go do those things. But I think the key innovation that Nutanix made was really simplifying everything. The
yeah,
management layer itself makes it super simple to do basically all of your operations. You get a ton of really easy and clean to read data. I think the other big thing was Nutanix was one of the first to go fully HTML5 prior to everybody having their own
yeah,
individual little apps. And Nutanix having a fully HTML5 management plane was an innovation and a real thing at the time. It's now fairly commonplace, but I think that was one of the key things that showed people like this is really the future of
yeah.
where we're going. So when we see that growth, kind of can you walk me through where a lot of that growth kind of came from and how does that growth really address what the common challenges that enterprises and other organizations are facing today?
Yeah. So it brings to mind like recently what I've seen in one of the Gartner reports I was reading, right? The IT environment in general has become super complex, right? That's one thing. So as an IT practitioner, IT decision maker, their life has become complex because of various factors, right? One is you have now different environments, right, to look after, and then not just different environments, but you have different technologies too, right? Like you have virtual machines, you have containers, right? Different things to manage. In addition to that, what's even making it more complex is the number of apps being developed, right? So another article that IDC Future Scope was saying that there's about 750 million apps, something like that, that would be developed, right? So, um, so that's a
That's
lot
a
of
few.
apps.
That's more than a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah. So all this is creating a lot of complexity from an IT perspective, right? So Nutanix provides, as I was describing before, if we put ourselves in the shoes of an IT personnel, right? What do you need? You need to have an infrastructure that helps you, manage this full scope of things from say a day zero operation. And on top of it, right, day one and day two operations, you want to manage this across, right? And obviously these days we've also have, with the limitations of budget, with the limitations of staffing and those kind of things, right? So um, that's where Nutanix comes in, right? That's where Nutanix vision is, right? Vision is to provide the full scope of solutions with that single management plane to make it easy for an IT personnel.
And I think a lot of that plays into kind of where we see things going, right? I think a lot of organizations right now, you mentioned all of the complexity that's happening right now. And it's not just in the base deployment, it's not just in the base infrastructure itself, it's everything after that, right? It's super fun to get to day one. And then everybody wakes up the next day on day two and goes, okay, now what
Yeah,
do I do? How do I
yeah,
patch this? How do I maintain this? Trying to manage all of this together as somebody who spent the last I don't want to it's been many years, 20 years at this point, managing various IT infrastructures. All of
yeah.
that interoperability can be really, really a challenge and makes the operations much more complex. So how does Nutanix really align IT strategies to overall business goals to actually make things better and help get rid of a lot of that complexity?
Yeah. So our goal is to simplify IT personnel's life, right? Essentially, that's what we're trying to achieve. Some of the things I'll call out here, right? For instance, from you mentioned about, yeah, getting to day one, day zero is fun, and after that, like, what's my life after that, right? So, few of the things that day-to-day life that an IT personnel does is cost governance. Security is a big thing, right? So these are and then intelligent operations. We call it intelligent operations, but just monitoring which VMs are working, which VMs are using a lot of resources. Maybe some VMs are over provisions, not being used, right? So those kind of operations that you have to manage. So one example that I'll talk about is the security central, right? Security central, in case with a lot of going on with security issues these days, you want to monitor what is the traffic, east-west traffic going on in your VMs. You want to create some policies based upon that, right? So Nutanix gives you like clear visibility on what's the communication that's going on across your east-west traffic. And if you want to create some policies where you want to get an alert, for instance, right? Like if something's not natural is happening, or if you want to keep them hands off, a certain VM, maybe a web server to a database server, you want to keep them hands off, then you can create policies that they don't, there's no data flowing between each other, right? So these are simple things that can help achieve that. Something that we call, for instance, in our some of our financial services customers, right? Like zero trust architecture, right? So these are the things that help support that zero trust architecture.
And I think the other piece is that because you have this full scope of solutions, you can also accelerate adding capabilities. I look at things like Nutanix Files of I need a new file server. I
Yeah,
can just go hit a button and spin that up. Same thing with NDB with database as a service. It's a super interesting platform overall to try and eliminate the pain points of adding file servers, database servers, all the rest of the infrastructure beyond just the virtualization infrastructure
yeah,
that I think really takes that full scope all the way out. Now, I would be doing our audience really a disservice if I didn't ask about the big, gigantic elephant in the room that everybody wants to talk about right now, which is Broadcom and VMware. Obviously, Nutanix and VMware have gone head to head over the last 15 years. By the way, happy
yeah.
15 years to Nutanix, founded in
Thank you.
2009. So this is 15 years. We've heard a lot about those changes, and it's always interesting to me to hear the success stories or what people are actually seeing in the field of the success that you have seen from the Nutanix side, right? We've heard it from our own people, but going out into the field and hearing more stories there. So can you kind of what are you hearing from your side around the changes that are happening and how people are going and trying to solve those?
Yeah. So VMware created the whole virtualization, right? Like they innovated that, and it's a very well-loved company, right? As a VMware, and there's many people many enterprises grew to rely on it. They build their careers on it, right? But Broadcom acquired it, and that's what caused the whole disruption, if I may say, right? Like because Broadcom's view of managing a business and VMware's view of managing the business is very different views, right? So as soon as Broadcom acquired it, they made some few changes, right? Like it's the same playbook that they applied, similar playbook they applied to the previous acquisitions like Symantec and CA Technologies. So some of the things that they've done is they've changed their business model with their licensing and packaging, right? That's one big change. The second thing they've also changed is the support model that they work with partners. And the third thing is which customers they focus on, right? This was unlike how VMware was in the market. So this obviously didn't match what some of the VMware customers were looking for, what they wanted for, right, for their own needs. So there's a lot of those customers who are looking for an alternative, and Nutanix, has, as we described before, provides all the solutions that they're looking for, right? So, so many of those customers are migrating, or maybe even like diversifying, right? So that they have both VMware and Broadcom on the infrastructure. So some recent success stories, for instance, is right here in my neighborhood, we have a school district, the largest school district called MVLA, right? That moved from VMware completely to Nutanix. And then a very well-known brand that you and we might be aware is Micron, right? Micron is a semiconductor fab company. They were going through their modernization exercise, right, of moving to containers, applications to containers, and they chose Nutanix for their modernization exercise. Right? So these are some great examples of success stories.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is, you mentioned it, is that sort of, diversification. We like to call it optionality. Of you
Yeah,
can have your workloads land where you want them to run. Not every application has been fully certified to run on Nutanix, even though it'll totally run fine on it. There's definitely an application certification layer that comes into play there. And I think a lot of folks are looking to kind of keep things at bay, right? I have this vendor who's changing things. I have another vendor who I can potentially bring in to make sure that they don't change things too much. But
yeah,
in doing so, you're now going back and adding more complexity on top of all the simplification that you were just trying to do. So I think for a lot of clients, when they want to look at options, this is where we at Expedient really fit in, because we can provide both services. We can do VMware private cloud or our enterprise cloud, or we can do Nutanix private cloud. So we have the ability to provide the various options, but not completely turn over all of the operations and make people have to learn 5 or 6 different things. You can leverage us to handle a lot of that. And I think one of those simplifications and or complexities kind of comes back around, where if you're going to diversify your platforms, how do you handle disaster recovery? Right? This
yeah,
has been a big thing for a lot of people when they start saying, well, we're going to move on and we're going to leave VMware and go to something else. It's that your traditional disaster recovery plans kind of go out the window. So
yeah.
how does Nutanix actually simplify that for organizations who are looking to make that move?
Yeah, that's a great use case, right? Especially, with Nutanix and Expedient partnership. Nutanix software makes it really simple, like very easy to deploy, and also matches your the RTO, RPO timelines that they want. And actually, this is built in our Nutanix architecture that we talked about, right? The AHV and AOS. I'm throwing some names out there, but essentially, this is a software that helps the HCI architecture that I mentioned before. So this is inbuilt in it, so it's easy to deploy. So it has inbuilt, replication, inbuilt snapshots, integrated snapshots, right? All of this kind of helps in the inbuilt disaster recovery features in it, right? So all of this really helps it being seamless experience and easy to deploy.
And I think the bigger piece there is because it's all natively integrated, it understands the underlying storage architecture.
Yeah,
And from our side, we build a private cluster and connect the Prism Centrals together, so you have one singular view across both of your environments. and then you can do your failovers across those platforms as you need to. But also we can provide management around the disaster recovery. So you can call us in the event of a disaster. We'll help you do DR testing. We'll help you do failover. All of those pieces that, again, are stuff that a lot of businesses want to do, but never feel like they have the time or the staff to be able to do that. That's where you can leverage a provider like us to really help take care of that. So how are we collaborating, right? I can talk through the Expedient side of this, but how are we collaborating to ensure that seamless migration, transitioning from VMware? Kind of how do you walk through a normal migration? I can talk through the Expedient piece there.
Yeah. So before we, when this organization thinks about migration, right, we have to think about, as you know, AJ, we were talking about this before, we have to go through a lot of planning process, right? You have just planning. First of all is, what do you want to migrate? VMs or infrastructure, or from a VM perspective or application perspective, you have to decide what do you want to migrate. And next, once you decide, then you have to come up with what are the dependencies of those, right, when you migrate. So you have to do a lot of planning. And then after that, stakeholder management. Maybe your business users on bringing them up to speed on engaging them. These are the things that we're going to migrate. And then, after migration, right, to the process of migration, and then testing, right? So we have to think about those kind of steps. And then as part of that, what Nutanix provides is a nice tool set, right? Nutanix Move. Essentially, it's a VM migration rehosting tool. It's included in the platform, right? That helps with this easy migration.
I think that's the key thing, is how much Nutanix actually puts into the platform itself. That it's not, okay, here's a third party thing, or here's an additional tool, or here's the thing that you need. It's just there. You can just use it, and it's great. I think the bigger piece for clients who are looking to make that migration, I think one of the biggest hurdles, not to necessarily go into the negative side, but playing devil's advocate a little bit, is that switching into Nutanix as an architecture can be very expensive CapEx wise if you're not already in the HCI space, because you are looking at, I already have my storage array, I already have my hosts. You layering on Nutanix isn't something that's just I just install some software and move on. Making that jump can be something that can be really heavy for a business. This is where Expedient comes in, because we can do that as a service where we can limit the amount of CapEx that you're having to outlay in order to move to a new platform and move away from VMware if that's something that you want to do. And we also help do the migration itself. We're a service provider. We've been in business for 20 years. We do migrations all of the time. I want to give a huge shout out to all my folks on the delivery team who literally sit down and go through with clients and make sure that everything moves smoothly. And the biggest thing that we find is configuring networking. Going through a client's networks, understanding where they actually need to land, what networks need to be there, and making sure those all get configured so that when the migration happens, we don't run into a ton of trouble of, oh, this VM powered on, but that network never got created, so it can't talk to anything, right? This helps dramatically lower the risk. We have a ton of experience doing it. And I think this is where Nutanix and Expedient come together. Nutanix has an incredibly powerful, very simple platform, and then pair that with a services team that can actually make sure that it all gets done correctly, smoothly, and right the first time, so that you can be sure and be confident that it's going to work going forward. And earlier you mentioned, I kind of want to jump to a different thing that you said earlier, was Security Central. Can we kind of talk through some of those security features that Nutanix has, and kind of how we're blending together to offer that and make sure that everything is secured all the way through coming onto the Nutanix platform?
Yeah, the basic things, right? Like, for instance, you have IAM, identity and access management, that is provided as part of the Security Central. In addition to that, right, creating security policies, right, across your environments. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you want to, create the security policies. If you want to migrate the security policies, that is also inbuilt. You can do that because, as we talked about before, you have one unified environment. So it's easy to create it once and then replicate and then use those security policies across. And another thing we talked is the monitoring the traffic between your sites, right? That is super helpful. Like, if you have something visually, just looking at a dashboard, literally, and monitoring this traffic across. It's amazing, right? Like it makes the IT person's life very easy and simple.
And I think that's the key thing, is that trying to make everything simpler. Data at rest encryption is just included.
Yeah.
We don't charge anything extra for it. It's not an additional add-on. It's not an additional disk cost. It's just there because it's the right thing to do, right? You're putting your data into what we are is a cloud provider. You would not put your data into unencrypted storage in AWS. Same here. We don't want to see your data. You don't want anybody else to see your data. So that's where the encryption comes into play. And then we also encrypt the connections between the sites. So as you're doing your DR replication, or you're doing your migrations, or you have on-prem to us, we make sure that all of that traffic is encrypted, so that when your traffic is moving across the wire between two sites, that nobody can snoop on it. And I think that's all of those pieces come into play, along with us being SOC 1, SOC 2 certified, HIPAA High Trust, PCI DSS. We can go through a number of different compliance certifications. And this is the sort of thing that helps you get to where you want to be without all of the effort that goes along with that, because we can do that at scale. And so when you're talking through that, journey of clients who are migrating into Nutanix, what's the sort of feedback that you receive on that? Is it like, hey, this was good, this was pretty good, or kind of how are clients feeling when they're making that jump into the new platform?
I mean, they love it. Like, they kind of surprised. I've been in a lot of proof of concept sessions for new customers. At first, when early on, when we present that, oh, you have this unified platform, right? You can just see all your underlying environments with this platform. They're surprised. They're like, okay, yeah, it's just marketing. We're just talking about it. But when we come to the proof of concept stage, they really love it when they see the tool, right? And then after that, you mentioned about support, and support. Nutanix support is very well known for support, right? And when we choose our partners we have partners provide that outstanding support. So customers, love that journey from preparing preparing them during the whole migration process, and then they're also super surprised in a good way once they see the environment, that how easy it makes their lives.
And I will say, as a former, not at Expedient, as a former Nutanix customer, Nutanix support is incredible.
Yeah.
What makes it more incredible? Putting Expedient support in front of it, because we also have our incredible support teams who are here 24/7. You can call us, get taken care of on our platforms, and be able to get the problem solved. That's really what we're after here. It's right. You're not calling us because it's like a nice day and you're wondering how we're doing. You're having a problem, right? So we want to get that problem solved as quickly and as easily as possible. And I know that we've talked a lot about the history of Nutanix, but kind of give me like a really brief kind of, what do you guys see over the next 2 to 3 years beyond where you see things now?
Yeah. Some of the things that everybody is planning these days, obviously, I think we can't finish this webinar without talking about AI, right? AI is a big thing. So everybody, we need to at least check the box AI. So, but that is something that's going on, right? So I've talked to many IT leaders, and this year they were planning on identifying what are the different use cases that they could implement within their organization, right? And they're planning to implement those AI use cases within their organization. So as they implement it, the first question is, how could I get started? Like, where can I get started, right? So Nutanix is offering a solution called GPT in a box that is actually a turnkey validated solution that makes it super simple, easy to start. That's one thing. The second thing is, even if you don't have a second trend that's going on, is the whole modernization, right? Like moving from VM based to container based applications, right? So for that, Nutanix also is providing something, we call it the Nutanix Kubernetes platform, right? It's basically a orchestration and a management tool for large scale Kubernetes environment, right? So with the Nutanix cloud platform, you can actually manage both Kubernetes containers plus also your traditional VMs, right? So that's something that as people are migrating over, right, many folks will have in existing legacy applications or legacy VMs, so they need to continue to manage that. So Nutanix Cloud Platforms provides capability to manage both of these things.
And I think that's really the next level of modernization is going to be, hey, how do I take my traditional workloads and make them more scalable? But then on the AI side, obviously we've done a ton on our side from an AI standpoint. We still have more coming, I promise. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but not today. Later day, come back. It'll be great. But I think this is where we all see everything going. We are aligned with what Nutanix is looking forward to of, hey, we see how do we handle app modernization across environments? How do we handle AI in the world? How do we put those sort of solutions together? And we're definitely aligned with Nutanix on that. But before we go, because I want to make sure that we have Harsha here, so I want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of his availability. Let's take some audience questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead and submit them into the chat. I do want to thank everyone who submitted questions as part of registration. It actually helps us out a lot to make sure that we're on the right track and make sure we cover things. Some of the questions that were asked, we did cover in the actual content, but I wanted to make sure that we got some of the direct questions answered. So I'm going to go to the first question here. And the first question is, how do you decide when to go on-prem on Nutanix versus in the cloud, or what stays on a private cloud versus going public? So I'm gonna let you take this one first.
Yeah, that's a big decision, AJ, right? And then that decision could change also over time, right? Once you pick a place. So I think it's good to think about it from a framework perspective on how to you come up with that decision, right? From a framework perspective, for each business, you need to consider one is whatever you're building, right? Your application that you're building, what's the maturity of that application, right? Does that application, do you know what kind of resource usage does it have, right? So that helps you for easy planning of resources. If you don't know yet, right, then maybe it's cloud, maybe it's on-prem, right? So that's one thing of the maturity of the application. The second thing that you have to consider is the data aspect itself. Within the data aspect, do you have any regulatory constraints on it? And also within the data aspect, where is the data originating from, right? Do you want to keep the application and that data closer, right? So that's the other aspect, the data itself. The third thing is you might want to think about is what's your plan for this from a financial perspective, right? Like CapEx versus OpEx, right? So these are the things that you think. So essentially, these are the factors that you need to consider that help you decide whether you want to go on private cloud, public cloud, or where you want to put it. And by the way, this decision could change, right? Because based upon these underlying factors, maybe this year you start on private, maybe next year you put on cloud, or vice versa.
And I think that's definitely where we see a lot of the things. The biggest piece is data origination points and the criticality of connectivity. I know that's a bunch of big words that start with a C, but the big thing there is when I have a workload, is it going to be okay if that workload lives somewhere outside the four walls of that location, right? In retail manufacturing, they can't rely on internet as a critical piece of infrastructure because they may have things that are in remote locations or that are not well served by various carriers. So they don't have the capability to say, oh yeah, if we lose one circuit, it'll be fine. We can keep running. If the internet goes down and the plant goes down, big problems exist. So that's one big reason to stay in an on-prem in solution. But when we start talking about cloud, we see a cloud service provider like Expedient being really beneficial for a lot of organizations because we are hands-on. We want to work with you. We want to make sure that everything is going smoothly and being done correctly and not just hand you a button to let you go spend money, right? And go deploy stuff and then have to go figure it all out yourself. We want to help get you to where you want to be faster. And that really involves having a hands-on approach. And that's really where we see it. So when we look at things like private cloud versus public or cloud service provider or Expedient versus hyperscale cloud like AWS or Azure, the big thing for us is, do you want to get there faster? Do you need help along that way versus taking on more workloads in other locations and have to learn all of that on top of everything else that you're doing? So that's generally what my decision point has been. And it usually helps customers understand like, oh, actually, yes, that they're going to manage the hardware, but after that, it's still on me to do everything else. This is where we start to help clients kind of walk through that.
Yeah.
We'll go to the next question here. I know that we are potentially going over time, so if you have to leave, if you, the audience, have to leave, that's great. This will all be recorded and be available on our YouTube channel. But we're going to keep going because there's some really great questions in here. So what are the typical savings versus a similar managed VMware private cloud environment? And I'll take this one. From our standpoint, we have partnered deeply with Nutanix on building out a really, really cost-effective solution. And in a lot of our cases, when we start talking through TCO between a do-it-yourself environment versus a VMware environment versus our environment, in a lot of cases, we can deliver the Nutanix platform at a much, much lower cost. I don't have specific percentages because it depends on sizing and all that sort of stuff, but we can generally deliver the Nutanix solution at a lower cost than an equivalent VMware environment. And that's where we see a lot of clients kind of open their eyes and go, oh, wait, I didn't know that was a thing. Because a lot of times they look at both of those sides and they say, oh, they're about the same costs. It's something that we can do to help lower costs, and we're doing all of it as a managed service. So we're actually helping you get there and not have to relearn everything. That's really the bigger slice of that pie to actually show where the savings come from, especially around people time. And then DR costs, Harsha, when we start talking about DR costs, usually it's pretty straightforward. It's just whatever the old thing was times 2, right? But there's more to it than that. So how does this compare, kind of price-wise with VMware? And I think for Nutanix, because your stuff is included, there's a big savings of just software savings, right? That you don't have to buy that third-party tool.
Yeah, definitely, right? Like, because it's included in our Nutanix, replication and data and disaster recovery, it's included in our software package already. So that really helps from a cost perspective as well. Yeah.
And I think from our DR side, the bigger piece is for a lot of organizations having that second site, having all the second gear that they had to go buy, and especially with newer VMware licensing where it's that licensing is on all the time. We're able to help lower those costs dramatically in terms of our DR licensing, both with VMware and Nutanix, but being able to offer it as a fully protected and managed solution of we're managing all the hardware on the back end. So you're saving all that, the soft costs of having to maintain all those things, as well as the licensing costs on top. So definitely come talk to us if you want to learn more about, DR pricing and kind of walk through what we can do there and how we scope all that out. We can definitely talk after this. I'm going to jump down to this question about potential savings. So there was a question that came in that what are the potential savings after all the work to switch is done? And I think this is where the savings are really around time. Right? All of the simplification that the Nutanix platform does allows you to spend more time focusing on other things. So the savings is both from a financial standpoint of we're able to deliver that solution cheaper, but also we can help with all of the pieces that go around it, backups, DR, monitoring, et cetera, that now you have all that time to focus going forward on net new projects, things that your organization wants to do that you've just not really had the time to do, and get all those things back. And Harsha, I think this is where Nutanix really shines in terms of, because you're able to simplify all those things, that it makes it a lot easier to show savings going forward.
Yeah, some quick thing that I want to add here as well, right? When you look at the total cost of ownership, as you mentioned, right? It's Nutanix, because of how it simplifies the whole IT environment, it helps with that whole total cost of ownership, right? And also because it's a scale out architecture, right? You can plan about based upon how your business is growing, right? Instead of a huge capex investment. And the third thing is the way you want to look at it is where, as IT leaders, where do you want your organization to be in like 3 to 5 years, right? In 3 to 5 years, if you're thinking about a complete portable environment, right? As in you can port your apps and data, right? That's one thing, right? That's where you want to be. And if you're thinking about modernizing your applications, right? These are the biggest things that are happening that also enables your portability, that helps you get your innovation faster to the market. If you want to be in 3 to 5 years, right, that's where you're planning to be. Nutanix cloud platform, it's built for that, right? So that's a big thing that IT leaders are looking and choosing why to go with Nutanix, and that's exactly the previous one of the success story I mentioned about Micron, right? Micron, that's why they chose in 3 years, they wanted to be on modernized platform, right? So they chose Nutanix for that.
And I think it's hard to not land on that one.
Yeah.
I want to thank Harsha for all of his time. I want to thank all the folks at Nutanix that we've worked with that have really helped bring this webinar to life, but also to help bring the overall platform to life. This has been really, really great. I want to, there's going to be a QR code that pops up after this. If you want to learn more, you want to dive deeper, you want to talk through, the overall solution with us, you can absolutely do that. Harsha, do you have any final thoughts before we go?
I think it's been a great session. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I think we got great topics, and any other questions, please reach out to us.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.